Oh, this is good. I like this. Cool. Today we're going to talk about the importance of safety equipment when working in these conditions.
The morning light crept through the curtains, brushing against Diep's pale face as she sat in silence, cradling a cup of tea that had long since cooled. The steam was gone, much like the warmth she used to feel when she thought of her parents. The world outside stirred to life. Birds chirped, dogs barked in the distance. But within the quiet corners of her heart, only one question echoed. Why did they abandon me? She had asked it 1,000 times, but the answer had always been the same: silence. And yet, something about today felt different. There was a weight in her chest, an ache that pulsed with each breath she took. She had decided, today, she would confront the past. Meanwhile, James stood at the edge of a construction site, holding a roll of architectural blueprints. His brows furrowed as he listened to Lynn explain the challenges they were facing. "If we stick with full wood, we won't make the deadline," Lynn said. "Go mow is decent, but the truly solid timber is rare. Even if we get lucky, 1 week is impossible." James sighed. "Can we use alternatives for some parts?" Lynn nodded, pointing to the blueprint. "Concrete floors, iron roofing frames. But for the support beams, those must be wood, or we risk the building's integrity." James agreed. His mind, however, wasn't entirely on the building. Diep had called him earlier. She sounded tired, not physically, but emotionally, drained. "I'm visiting my uncle today," she had said, voice steady but void of emotion. "I need answers." James had offered to go with her, but she declined. Some roads, he understood, had to be walked alone. At her uncle's house, Diep sat across from the man who had raised her after her parents were gone. The room smelled of old incense and forgotten memories. "Are they really dead?" she asked again. The question floated in the air like dust in sunlight. Her uncle stared at her, then down at his hands. "Yes, Diep, you've asked this before." She looked into his eyes, searching for the truth. "Do you swear it?" He paused, then nodded. "I swear." But as she stepped outside, heart heavy, a gust of wind carried his muttered words to her ears. "They were monsters. I had to protect her." Diep's breath caught. The world tilted. A sharp pain pierced her chest, and everything went dark. Back at the construction site, James checked his phone. No messages. His gut twisted with unease. He excused himself from the site and made a call. No answer. Minutes later, he was in his car, racing through the winding hills to find her. When he arrived, she was collapsed outside her uncle's home, unconscious. Panic surged. He carried her to the car, whispering, "Why didn't you listen to me? I told you to rest." As they drove through the storm that had just begun to roll in, James caught sight of two familiar figures ahead. An older couple, cloaked in silence. He didn't speak, but his heart thudded heavily. Could they be? No, it wasn't the time. The rain began to pour. The road ahead washed out by a landslide. They had to stop, find shelter. He parked under a tree, wrapping his coat around Diep. Her face was pale, vulnerable, lost. As she stirred awake, her eyes met his. "They lied," she whispered. "All these years they lied." He said nothing. There was nothing he could say that could take away that kind of pain. But he stayed. holding her hand as the storm roared outside, holding space for her grief. Later, as she rested, James looked at her sleeping face. Maybe, he thought, it's better if she doesn't know the full truth. Not yet. He remembered her saying, if they're gone, it's easier. At least then, there's no betrayal. How could he explain that sometimes the truth was more cruel than the lie? That some truths didn't set you free, they just changed the kind of prison you lived in. The storm raged outside, and inside James, a silent promise formed. Whatever came next, he would stand by her, even if the truth shattered her, even if it shattered them both. James stood by the window of his temporary office, the wind brushing against the wooden blinds as if echoing the storm inside his mind. The view from here overlooked the construction site where wooden beams lay scattered, waiting to be transformed into a home for someone, maybe even for himself one day, if fate allowed. But his heart wasn't on timber or steel, it was on Diep. He couldn't stop replaying the look in her eyes the last time they met, how exhaustion wrapped around her like a veil, how she smiled to mask the heaviness within. She was trying to be strong, but he knew the burden she carried was more than just physical fatigue. It was years of abandonment, confusion, and the aching desire to know why. Why had her parents left her? Why did no one tell her the truth? And why, even now, did the answers continue to evade her? He clenched his fists as the guilt washed over him again. He knew the truth, or at least part of it, and he was withholding it from her. But how could he tell her that the people she yearned for so deeply were still alive? That they had chosen silence over love? It wasn't his truth to tell. Not yet. Not when she was barely holding herself together. He picked up his phone, staring at her contact name. Should he call? Should he ask her to rest again, even though he knew she wouldn't? She had told him that staying idle made her thoughts spiral, and he understood that. Her pain demanded motion. He sighed and dialed, hoping just to hear her voice. Hello? Her voice came soft but alert, like she had been waiting for the call. You're working again, aren't you? He asked gently. Just a little paperwork, she replied, dodging the full truth. He could hear the weariness, even through the effort she made to sound normal. Diep, you need to slow down. You said you were tired. I know, she whispered, but resting doesn't help. My mind won't stop. I get that, he said, lowering his voice as if afraid the truth might leak out. Just don't push yourself too hard, please. There was a pause. Thanks, James. I'll be okay. But he knew she wouldn't. Not until the ghosts of her past stopped whispering. Meanwhile, Lynn entered the office with new blueprints, the updated structural designs, she said, placing them on his desk. James forced himself back into the present. Thanks, Lynn. Any news on the lumber? We might have found a hill of mature trees grown by locals, she said. Not the rare hardwoods, but sturdy, well-aged timber, over 10 years old. It'll work. Let's go see it, James said. This afternoon. But even as he turned back to the designs, his thoughts trailed again to Diep. The way she sought out her uncle, the desperation in her eyes as she asked whether her parents were truly gone. The uncle had lied to her face, saying they were dead. And then, when she left, muttered the truth. They're alive, just not worth finding. That truth burned in James's chest. How could they abandon her and still walk this earth unburdened? Why was Diep the only one carrying the weight? Later that evening, James found himself unable to sleep. He drove down to the small house where Diep was staying. The road had been damaged by the storm earlier that week, with small landslides making it difficult to pass. But he pushed on. He needed to see her. When he arrived, the lights were off, but a faint glow from the kitchen indicated she was still awake. She opened the door before he could knock. James? She asked, surprised. What are you doing here? "I couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Neither could I." She moved aside, letting him in. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comforting, filled with unspoken understanding. He noticed the papers on her table: birth records, letters, old photographs. She was still searching, piecing together a puzzle with missing corners. "I talked to my uncle today," she said finally. "He said my parents died a long time ago." James looked down. "Do you believe him?" "I want to, but something doesn't feel right." Her eyes met his. "Do you know anything?" He froze. This was the moment. He could tell her. He could finally release the truth that had been burning his conscience for weeks. But instead, he said, "I think sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie." Her face fell. She turned away, but not before he saw the disappointment. She had hoped for more. The next morning, Diep fainted. She had been trying to move a stack of wooden panels by herself, stubborn as always. A worker found her collapsed and called James. He raced to the site, lifting her into his arms without hesitation. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "I told you to rest." She stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open. "James." "Shh, you're okay." He took her to a clinic, stayed by her side until she stabilized. But the doctor warned him. Her condition wasn't just physical. She was emotionally depleted, carrying more than her body could bear. Later that day, as rain began to fall heavily again, James stood alone beneath a tree, watching the water carve paths through the soil like veins. He thought about Diep's parents, about the uncle's words. They were cruel. Better she never knows. But was it really better? Was ignorance truly a mercy? That night, back at his lodging, James made a decision. If Diep couldn't find her answers, he would. He would go to the city, track down the names, force the truth into the light. He packed a bag and left without telling anyone. The journey took him to an old neighborhood where a man confirmed what he had feared. Diep's parents were alive, living under new identities. They had left their daughter behind in the village, deeming her too much trouble, and started fresh. James's hands trembled as he held a photo of them, smiling with a new family. How could they smile after what they did? Rage threatened to consume him, but he steadied himself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about truth. When he returned, he found Diep at the edge of the forest, sitting beneath the rain-soaked canopy of trees, staring into the distance. She looked small, fragile, and utterly alone. He sat beside her. She didn't look at him. "I went looking," he said. "I found them." She didn't react. Her body remained still, as though bracing. "They're alive," he continued. "And they left you, willingly." Finally, she turned. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "Why?" "They were afraid," he said. "Of responsibility, of you being different." She laughed bitterly. "So they just started over?" "Yes." "And they never looked back?" "No." She nodded slowly, absorbing it like a blade to the heart. Then she whispered, "I wish you hadn't told me." "I'm sorry." "No. Thank you. I needed to know." She stood and walked away, leaving James alone in the storm. He knew this would break her, but perhaps from that break, something stronger could grow, something unshakable. As she disappeared into the rain, James made a vow, not to fix her, not to heal her, but to stand beside her through whatever came next. Because love, real love, wasn't about saving someone. It was about walking with them through the fire, even when they didn't want you there. The days after James left were heavy with silence. Diep sat alone in the wooden house, her fingers curled around the small, worn-out photograph of them together, the last photo they took before everything changed. Outside, the sky remained gray, mirroring the dull ache in her heart. messages from James still came, filled with gentle love and reassurances, but they could never fully replace the warmth of his presence. She replied with a brave smile each time, though her hands trembled with longing. Every corner of the house whispered memories. His laughter echoed off the walls, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the blankets, the way he used to brush her hair from her face. Meanwhile, James, far away in the highlands, buried himself in work. He had quickly risen to respect among the local staff, but every success felt hollow. At night, he would lie on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying Diep's voice in his head, wondering if she was sleeping well, if Tu Chao remembered his promise to bring her paper flowers on her next birthday. Though miles apart, they both clung tightly to the same hope, that one day, soon, they would be together again. But trouble brewed quietly. In the commune where James worked, his efforts caught the attention of not only admirers, but also skeptics. Some whispered that he was only promoted because of connections. Others resented his rapid rise, but none dared to challenge him openly, until the day a local official leaked a report questioning the legitimacy of his transfer. News of the investigation reached James while he was overseeing the setup of a new mobile clinic. The world blurred for a moment. His hands tightened around the blueprints, and the voices of the workers faded behind the pounding of his thoughts. It was happening. His father's shadow was following him even here. Meanwhile, back home, Diep was facing a battle of her own. Her aunt, who had always been a quiet supporter, began to distance herself, growing cold and withdrawn. Diep overheard a conversation one night, her aunt and a neighbor speaking in hushed, urgent tones about James's father, about how power in the commune ran deeper than anyone admitted. "He's dangerous," the neighbor whispered, "not just ambitious, calculating. You think he'll really let them live happily ever after?" That night, Diep cried silently, wondering if their love was doomed by forces beyond them. She tried to call James, but the line wouldn't connect. Storms in the highlands often knocked out Sabanol. Instead, she wrote him a letter, pouring every fear and ache into words he might not read for weeks. She tucked it under the small wooden statue he carved for her, the one with their initials scratched into the base. Meanwhile, James stood at a precipice. He was summoned by the commune board for questioning. The room was hot, the air thick with judgment. "Do you deny," the chairman asked, "that your father influenced your transfer?" James met the man's eyes with calm fury. "I never asked for favors. If I'm not worthy, then remove me. But don't insult the people I serve by dragging them into politics." His voice carried through the room like thunder. The silence that followed was broken only by a cough. A week later, he received official clearance. He was to remain in position. Relief was bittersweet. Back home, Diep's health took a turn. Weeks of stress had worn her thin. One afternoon, while preparing lunch for Tu Chao, she collapsed. Her aunt found her on the floor, unconscious, the kettle boiling over behind her. At the hospital, doctors warned of extreme fatigue and emotional exhaustion. "She's holding too much in," one nurse whispered. "She needs peace." But peace was a luxury she hadn't known since James left. When he finally returned, earlier than planned, he walked into the hospital room to find Diep asleep, her skin pale, her lips cracked. His heart clenched. He pulled a chair beside her, took her hand, and whispered her name. She stirred, slowly, then opened her eyes. For a moment, they just stared at each other, letting the silence carry everything they couldn't say. Then, slowly, she smiled. "You came back," she whispered. "I always said I would," he replied, tears welling in his eyes. And in that fragile moment, they both knew that whatever storms came next, they would face them together, hand in hand, heart to heart. But not everything was behind them. James's father, furious that his interference hadn't worked, began to push harder behind the scenes. He pressured old allies to reevaluate James's authority, tried to sever his funding. One evening, James received an anonymous message. Your next project might be your last. Walk away before you lose more than your job. He didn't tell Diep. She was still recovering, and he wouldn't burden her. But the darkness was closing in, and somewhere, in the tangled web of ambition, resentment, and old family secrets, a decision would have to be made. Would love be enough? Or would the world demand a sacrifice neither of them were ready to give? James stared at the rising moon. Its pale light cast over the hills and whispered to the night, "Whatever comes, I'll protect her, even if it costs me everything." And thus, their fight was far from over. It had only just begun.